Thank you very much, Angela, for taking your time and doing this interview with us. Angela is a foresight expert working for the OECD, and she came to Prague to be here as a trainer for workshop for people from public administration and other experts. So first of all, foresight, it's an exciting word. Many people probably won't know what foresight is. So could you tell us what foresight means and why is it important, especially in the context of sustainable development?
Yeah, so sustainable development is a forward-looking concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, we want a different type of development. We want to realise a different form of society.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a sense in sustainable development that you want to avoid unsustainable development. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be avoided. And foresight is part of the way we can think about the future in the present.
Mm-hmm.
So traditionally, we used to do a lot of forecast-based planning. We'd assume that the future could be predicted, we'd produce a trend analysis or a projection, and we'd use that to inform policy. How would we prepare for that situation? But increasingly, we live in a world which is unpredictable, which is disruptive in its changes, and which has new and very different possibilities, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to open up the way we think about the future. And we need to think about how are we going to take forward sustainable development. Even though the future can't be predicted, we can still shape it, react to it, and adapt to it.
Mm-hmm.
So foresight is a way of getting to grips with the unpredictable future, but recognising that that doesn't mean that we don't have the responsibility or the ability
Mm-hmm.
to create a better future.
Mm-hmm. Does it mean we can have the future we want?
Not necessarily. It depends what future we want. I mean, I remember somebody saying to me that policymakers like things that are simple, predictable, and easy to understand. And I remember saying, well, I would like to be Claudia Schiffer. But it isn't going to happen. So, I mean, I think it's very important. If you don't have a sense of what the future you would like to see, we're human beings at the end of the day. There isn't any of us that isn't motivated by the concept of a better life
Mm-hmm.
for ourselves or for our children.
Mm-hmm.
And so sustainable development has this normative aspect in it of wanting
Mm-hmm.
better.
Mm-hmm.
What does better mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a question.
Individual.
So it can be, but at a societal level it means a shared vision,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of what it means for all of us in the future, right?
Mhm.
So that's the future we would prefer.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge then is not to stop at the vision and think about, well, how do we make progress towards that? And that's
Mhm.
where you get to strategy and planning.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Perfect.
it's not enough to think what we would like to see. We also have to do the work of, can we get there and
Mhm.
how do we get there?
Mm-hmm. We are currently working on our strategic document on sustainable development, and we have there a vision. And we're trying to use foresight methods to make this, to come up with this document. How could foresight methods be used in drafting such a document?
Well, you've used one, you've used
Yes.
vision.
Vision.
So vision is
one
a
already.
foresight method.
Mhm.
It's a way of saying, this is the future we would like to see. It's a design concept, you know, the future we would prefer to see looks like this. But that's one way of thinking about the future. Then you have to think, well, what's the future that might happen to us, even if we wouldn't want it to come about? Because the future's it's not all heaven and it's not all hell. So another method is scenario planning. That
Mhm.
encourages you to think about what you can't control, but is happening anyway, that you might have to adapt to or work with. So
Mhm.
scenario planning is about different alternative futures
Mhm.
and what they mean for what we're trying to do. Another method would be megatrends. A megatrends analysis is about the big global shifts and changes that are happening.
Mhm.
But if you have started with a vision in your strategy, your next job is to say, well, if that's where we'd like to go, how do we get there? And that's where you start to move into strategy.
Mhm.
Strategy isn't the same as the vision. It's how do you start to translate that vision into high-level goals
Mhm.
that are measurable and
Mhm.
tangible, and how do you use those goals to inform your strategic planning,
Mhm.
and then how do you operationalise that plan?
Mhm.
And when you're going through that, you might want to use some scenarios, you might want to use some megatrends analysis, and you might want to use more horizon scanning.
Mhm. We are, in our strategy, we're trying to integrate the Agenda 2030, which is a crazy job, as you can imagine, because we have 169 targets there and quite a lot of indicators. And has OECD some idea how foresight methods could be used to help national states to implement the global agenda and make their own strategies in line with this agenda?
Yeah, so you started off with your vision, and your vision, of course, is aligned somehow with that global vision. I mean, that's what the Universal Development Agenda is. And then the Sustainable Development Goals are highly ambitious, but also very unspecific. They don't tell you how to get to them. So you start off with this Universal Development Agenda and this global vision. You're translating it through your national vision, and then you're going to go into your strategic planning. And in the strategic planning, you have to have, at some point, you have to develop a measurement framework. Because if you're going to start working out how do we know which options take us closer to the vision or not, we have to know how would we measure progress. So we also need a new measurement framework. And then we need to combine, if that's the vision, this is the way we could measure progress. We need to know where do we stand now, what's the situation analysis, and then you have to work out what's the gap and how do you close it. So the OECD helps you do this because it can give you what's our view of the current situation in terms of the economic development of the country or in terms of your education system. You can also use the OECD to help you with what's the big global changes that are shifting, that are very hard to see from a country by country perspective. And you can also use OECD analysis, which helps you think about, well, what's the global projection? You know, what could the global economy look like, and how would then the Czech economy compare and contrast with that? So I think the Sustainable Development Goals are high on ambition, and the value of the OECD is that we're high on implementation. And foresight is a way that you have to create this space of translating vision into action through strategic planning, and for that you need different foresight methods.
Sounds like a perfect match. We just need to make it work now.
Perfect. It's a marriage of inconvenience. It's full of tension and trouble, but it's essential to do. We're trying to continuously adapt to a shifting future. I'm trying to describe it as we're shooting at a moving target while we're standing on shifting sand. That's the equivalent of planning in today's world. And it's not about big blueprints and 2030 this is what it's going to be. It's about having an idea about where we want to be in the long term, and then finding ways of creating constructive interaction between the many different actors, helping them share an understanding of what's going on, and help them think about how their actions interact with each other as we move forward.
You've mentioned in our previous discussion that planning is not that much anymore about control, which is, I think, what people with from countries with a communist history are very scared of, that planning means controlling, planning means having exactly these big blueprints. But obviously we've done a lot of, there has been a lot of work done in planning, and approach to planning has changed a lot. So planning is not something we should be afraid of, right?
Planning is no longer a static ivory tower exercise of imagining what the future would like the future to be, and then going out and instructing everybody to deliver it. It changed a long time. I think there's a US general who said, planning is everything, the plan is never going to be right. They're different things. So the plan is, what are we going to do in the next 2 years? The planning is, what is changing, how's it changing, and what does that mean about what we can and can't do? And that's a continuous process. So foresight is really about everything from, do we understand the direction we want to go in? Do we understand whether what else is changing? Do we understand how to build the new road to the future, our roadmap? Are our existing policies up to the job, or do we need to design new ones? And what are we designing them to do? And what context do they have to work in? So it's not all within our control, the future. And I have two examples of this approach. One's really historical and one's really modern. The very historical one is the building of the Cathedral of Chartres in France. Right? Let's imagine we go back a 1,000 years. They're about to build a cathedral. Nobody knows what this cathedral looks like. It's the equivalent of sustainable development. Nobody knows what it looks like, but we all understand we have to achieve it. And what you have is a group of craftsmen and operators who get together. There's no big blueprint, but but they managed through continuous conversation, through trial and error, through prototyping, to build this edifice that still lasts today.
And it took them generations, right?
Generations
so
of sustained action, all inspired by vision
Mm.
and all motivated by continuous learning and interaction. But they had to have that shared vision, and they had to understand, they had to come back and understand whether they were making progress towards it or not all the time, right? So they were planning and they had a vision, but they didn't have a blueprint to operate on. And the more recent example of that is the Higgs boson experiment, which is the top field of science of looking for what they call the God particle, or the origins of the universe. So here you have a group of international scientists, top of their field, coming together, trying to work out, can they discover something together? There's no big common blueprint of what this thing is, but for 10 years they go from people telling them this thing doesn't exist to creating an experiment that none of them could have imagined beforehand, to proving this is
that
real.
it's there. Yeah.
So we have this ability to work not with 2030 as the place we're going to, but as 2030 as the magnet that pulls us forward.
Yeah, I really see this is very much about changing your perspective and your mindset completely, like opening yourself up.
Yeah. So not looking from here to the future, but standing in the future and looking back and asking, are we doing enough? Could we do better? What more could we? What more can we achieve together?
Perfect. And maybe one final question. You talked a lot about vision for the future. What is your vision for a sustainable future? I know that's a tricky one. I'm sorry.
Gosh, I'm old enough. I'm long old. I've been engaged in the Sustainable Development Agenda for over 30 years. It's important.
And has it changed?
Yes, it has changed. So in the if we think about its origins, around the late 1960s and 1970s, we had Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which catalysed the whole environmental movement globally, in the sense that somehow, environment isn't completely forgivable. There are limits, right? And then there were the reactions in the 70s to limits of growth, including by my current employers, the OECD, who said, well, actually, there's no contradiction between growth and environment. We can find policies that enable you to do both, right? And then around the 1980s we saw another change, because somehow the development agenda had dropped off the table. There was environment and growth, and there was, environment and economy were talking to each other, but society had got lost. And society came back in. We started seeing the pro-poor development agenda. And by the time we get to 1992 and the first Rio Earth Summit, we all understand we have this triangular framework of economy, society, and environment.
3 pillars. Yeah.
And what we've been trying to do ever since is work out how to operationalise that in incredibly siloed organisations which work in one part of that triangle. And the only way to bring them together is, there is no scientific, universal, God-given view of which are the right connections. You have to try and create a perspective on it. And that's what we use foresight for. It gives you a way of building perspective on that triangle and saying which of these linkages are most important at this point for what we're trying to do. And so it's the agenda's evolved because it's moved from growth, economy versus society versus environment, to being something that tries to look at synergies and trade-offs, but continuously is challenged to try and find a way of getting better perspective on those.
When we discuss this concept of 3 pillars, very often people come up with security as the 4th pillar. Would you see it as that? Maybe it's again the pressing of the situation that is making us think.
It could be, and it depends what they mean by security, because sustainable development, depending on how you read it, if you take it as, well, it's everything, society's fine, we just have to change the way we're acting, then your security challenge is the traditional international relations security challenge, right? Of big powers, little powers, how do we make an accommodation in a world that we've all got to fit in? But if your view of sustainable development is it's as much about political and social innovation as it is about technology innovation and finding new ways of doing things, then your concept of security would have to change. And what does security mean in a world where people are fundamentally interdependent? And the old security strategies of domination or isolation are equally useless. And so security in an interdependent world is the same to me as the Sustainable Development Agenda. but it's not the same as the classic security agenda.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.